And a special shout out to Mary Virginia Swanson, who's here on the call. For those of you who haven't done a workshop with Swanee, hey Swanee, it will be one of the highlights of your professional career. She has helped thousands, if not more, photographers with their professional practice. And so thanks for being here.
And my pleasure. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
All right, shall we get things going, Susan?
Sounds great.
Cool. Well, hey everyone, thanks for joining. My name's Eric William Carroll. Susan invited me along to help lead some sessions regarding photo books, which is a passion of mine, something I have a little bit of experience in, but I'm also not an expert. So take this as one person's experience in the world of photography publishing. So this is also going to be a 2-night exploration of this topic. So next Wednesday, same time, same place, Eric Mace will be leading us through part 2 of this discussion. As Susan alluded to, our goal here is to create a shared resource list for photographers, for bookmakers, where if you're a first timer or a seasoned pro, it's worth visiting and checking out what tools are available, who's out there that you can engage for design help, for publicity help, all that kind of stuff. My experience making a book alone can be really fun, but making it with a large group of people can be even more impactful and something that will resonate through a larger group as well. So I'll share my screen here and we'll get things going. Oh, I should also note, please ask questions throughout this presentation. It's going to be a lot of slides at the beginning because I just want to share some of the work that I've made that I've never really shown, because part of my publishing practice is just a personal practice. But when we get to the end, that's where I really want the conversation to take over, because I'll probably be hoarse at that point too. So, okay, share my screen. And let's make sure I can see the chat. There we go. Okay. All right. So you want to make a photo book. I kind of start out a little negative on here. There's a lot of photo books out there in the world. So a lot of times people in the photo book world will say, just don't. There's too many already, and we're never going to get to all of them. But I find a lot of joy in making photo books. And so I wanted to share that sort of that journey of how I found that joy. I learned a lot about photo books from this guy. This is Alex Soth. He is a very prominent American photo book maker, probably best known for his book, Sleeping by the Mississippi. It came out in 2004. And I mark that publication along with a lot of other photo book blogs around that time as sort of the renaissance of photo book publishing. He taught me a very important thing, that you will never make money from making photo books. The reason he's got cash in his hand is because he's selling PBRs at a gallery opening. Okay, so if you want to make money, go into bartending. If you want to be famous, go into a different industry. If you want to explore the joy of photography, make photo books. That's my takeaway. Unfortunately, most photo books will never be seen by the general public. If you would just think about the general population that's familiar with some of the most popular photo books in the world, like Robert Frank's The Americans, for instance, it's still such a small sliver of the general population. So one thing I found in producing photo books is that you're making a photo book and you're probably going to share it with other photo book makers. Alec told me that there's 2 kinds of photographers in the world: photographers who make work for the page and photographers who make work for the wall. I fit in the middle, where I do a little bit of both. And so I want to talk first about why I would make a project for the book versus for a wall. So here's my little not pros and cons, but just differences between experiencing a photography book versus a photography exhibition. So on the left, we have the bullet points for the books. A book is usually an intimate experience with someone's project. You're usually the only one reading it. And whereas an exhibition is going to be experienced usually with more people, sometimes strangers as well. A photo book is usually going to be sequential. It's generally organized in a specific order that the author encourages you to read in. That doesn't mean that you're going to, but the sequence, I think, is really important. An exhibition often is sequential too. The curators are very much thinking about the way their ideal visitor will experience the show. But the exhibition has that ability where you can, if it's a one-room exhibition especially, you can take in all of the work at once. You get this sort of zoomed out view that I think a photo book doesn't necessarily offer. In my experience, when I work with a photo book as a reader, it's a lot more active engagement in someone's work. Whereas when I'm at an exhibition, I mean, literally, I keep my hands behind my back. I'm careful not to touch things. I'm very much more of a passive experience. Really just focus on the looking. A photo book is a natural space for text to accompany the imagery. I don't think anyone has any problem sitting down with a book and encountering 3 to 20 pages of text. That's a very normal experience. In an exhibition, didactics can be seen as distracting and sometimes even taking away the spotlight from the imagery. I'm sure many of you heard an unsourced quote where people spend more time looking at the exhibition label than they do the picture on the wall. Photo books are exceptionally tactile. There's something usually holding your hand. I would even argue that for ebooks, whereas an exhibition is usually site-based, experiential. Lastly, photo books are consumable. These are things that you can take with you, have on your home, on your bookshelf, whereas an exhibition is usually something you leave home to see maybe once, twice, 3 times if it's an amazing show. But otherwise, once the show closes, there's no chance of revisiting it unless you bought the catalog. When most people think of the word photo book, the picture on the left comes to mind, the family photo album. And I love this because if there's any designers in the group, you might be wincing a little bit at the sort of the way popular masses treat. Oh, make sure you're muted, folks. Yeah. The photo book on the left is something that's going to be found in, I would hope, almost everyone's home, right? Whereas the fine art photography book, probably not. Still, it's going to be made for that same small audience, I would argue. There's always exceptions. Compare that to another kind of album, the record album, where you'd buy a music project, vinyl, LP, CD, whatever you're buying your media on. You're probably not a musician though, right? When you're a photography photo book maker, and you buy someone else's book, there's a good chance, yeah, that the people buying the book are also in the photography industry. So I just thought of that as kind of interesting. We put out books into the world, but the eyes and the people experiencing them is just radically smaller than I think a lot of the other creative communities out there. The photo book community and self-publishing community is exceptionally vibrant, though. This is the Miami Zine Fair from 2018, pre-pandemic. It is a fantastic community for like-minded individuals to come together, celebrate their work, and push the practice further, like really push the boundaries, because I still think it's a growing medium. There's a great book that was published, Matt Johnston's photo books, and that had a lot of kind of interesting hard data on here. Here's a graph that is from the book where he did a survey of about 200 photo book readers and found that, what do you say, over 70% of the readers of photo books were also involved in the making or disseminating of photo books. Okay, so just give you an idea of that population. Less than 20% of the readers said they weren't involved in the creative industries at all. So again, I think it's important to know your audience and get an idea of who's going to be looking at these books. So let's take a look at a few reasons why you might want to make a photo book, though. Again, not to get rich or famous. So here are the various avenues in which I've engaged with in self-publishing. And again, if people have questions, want me to go over anything, just drop a line in the chat, let me know. The very first book I ever made was this one. It's called Studio from 2008. It's a zine, really. And I find that if you've never made a photo book before, the best prompt you can give yourself is make it for exactly one other person, okay? That is the most defined audience you'll ever have. And so this was the book that I made for Alec when I was leaving his studio. I was a studio manager for several years, and then moved to New York, wanted to give him a small gift. And so it's just a simple LaserJet zine in which I had snapshots from my time as a studio manager, just these kind of bizarre, that's an Osama bin Laden pinata on the desk, some color print retouch color that's called Basic Flesh, which is very interesting from a racial standpoint right there as well, to the packing materials and all the other things that just go into running a studio. There's some of Joanne Verberg's prints on the left. I love her work. And then that back and front cover is actually, I used to do all the spotting on C prints. So that was like my mat board that I would test out all the colors on. So just something that I no longer do, thank God. I went through a lot of small brush hairs. Baron asks, what delineates zine from book? I don't know, Baron. It's a good question. I think zines traditionally have a history in counterculture publishing. This goes all the way back to the 30s. Queer communities, people of color, if they wanted to get content published, they were white male gatekeepers at the head of every publishing house, and they would prevent certain content from getting published, right? So zines or self-publishing came about as a way of skirting that. I don't think that's necessarily true for contemporary zine making, since the flow of information has become so much more broad, and I would argue there's less gatekeepers. But I think traditionally, if you were going to look at the historical sources of a zine, it would probably have an origin story that goes along with that, whereas a book is going to be more of a traditional capital B book published that was issued by a company. It's a good question, though. Second book I made was also a zine called I Have the Need to Destroy. This was a zine that I made for a small group of people. I just wanted to photograph I was living in Minneapolis at the time, the hardcore punk scene. And I had a hard time gaining an in. So I just joined a band, like told them I could play bass when I really couldn't, but it's hardcore punk, so no one's really listening to the bass that much anyways. There's a lot of screaming on top of those notes. So I made this zine, and it also came with a 7-inch where I was recording a lot of our practices and doing some audio experiments as well. Now you can see by the edition number right there, I made 125 of these. Okay, this is the number one rookie error when you go into self-publishing is you make too many books. My advice to every first person bookmaker is if you're going to make 100 books, you should be able to name 80 people who you know are going to purchase it from you if you are looking to sell it and not just give it away or have it take up space in your basement storage for the rest of your life. The reason I had to do 125 is just because to print a 7-inch record, that was the minimum run at the time. So that's how I did that. And then this, because it was so punk rock, the zine aesthetic just kind of fit a little bit more. So booklet zine, I tried selling a couple at Printed Matter. They might have sold, I don't know. I kept the price point really low, $10. There's me on bass playing to a bunch of people who like hardcore punk rock. But really it was about forming a friendship with these 3 other guys in the band. And that was 2008. Another reason to make a zine or a sort of a low stakes book is like I said, disseminating information in an old fashioned way. So getting around those gatekeepers or perhaps skirting algorithms, right? Going offline and just wanting to do something physical that can't be traced. So I made this zine series starting in 2010 called Make Your Own Museum. where I gave instructions for people how to recreate sort of popular conceptual minimalist artwork in their own homes, because you can never afford to buy like a Felix Gonzalez Torres installation or a Dan Flavin installation. So I gave people the instructions like, okay, here's where you're going to source the clocks. This is where they need to, how high they're traditionally installed, gave a little bit of information in the background of the project as well. This is kind of a fun zine series. And I would sell this at kind of anarchist bookstores. Was really my bread and butter for these, because it was a way of sort of getting around this traditional, art market that I was and continue to be excluded from. So I did a series of those. And then I started doing a series called Human Error. And this is where I get into my idea of just practice and play as a publisher, making books, not really intending to distribute them, but because it was practice. If you want to be a good bookmaker, you got to make books. You don't have to show all of them though. So this is kind of behind the scenes of that process here. So the first in my Human Error series was 2011, maybe, I think. I was doing tests and arrays. I was hand drawing resolution charts. So these are the charts that were being used by lens and film manufacturers to test the resolution of their optics and light sensitive film. I wanted to test my own resolution, so I tried to draw these by hand. So they're kind of comically bad, but also a collection of these bizarre images that are never really meant to be seen by humans necessarily. These are for machines. And so this was a way for me to collect that work and also experiment with printing on some vellum, trying different papers, seeing how far the laser jet could go for me. Human Error 2 is called newsprint, and this is where I tracked really the decline of one industry through the demise of another. So I was collecting all the articles that I could find of film-based photo industries shutting down. So here, AGFA selling their film and lab business. Projectors, traditional 35 millimeter projectors, no longer being produced. Kodak's demise there. And then I was doing these newsprint experiments where I was creating text stencils and exposing newsprint to sunlight for weeks. And then eventually the text would start to become imprinted on it. It would also fade away. And so this was a fun kind of conceptual experiment. A very depressing book, but one I still enjoy looking at as a time capsule. 2013, Stardust, Human Error number 3. Again, playing with material and form, I wanted to try and see how I could print on newsprint and also use the book form to turn into a poster. The content of this was, I was getting imagery from various space agencies, NASA, JPL, people that were creating photographs of the sky. This has long been an interest of mine. Making silver gelatin prints of them and then retouching the stars all the way out with my retouching fluid until you'd end up with a completely black sky. They didn't really translate well onto newsprint, but again, this was in a material investigation for me. And then the whole zine unfolded to be, I think, like an 18 by 24 poster. And so that was Human Error number 3. Human Error number 4, trying to play with format and trim size here. I wanted to create a very skinny book, but also I was really interested, still am interested in embracing randomness and chance. I wanted to create a zine and a system that would allow each zine to be different, but the format to be the same, if that makes any sense. So I photographed myself throwing dice in the air 1,000 times and then set up a way of randomizing. So each issue would get a different set of pictures. So I call this one New Constellations. Again, my interest in stars. There is the constellation created from that dice toss. And then the rest of the book just starts to shrink down and show all the other pictures in there. So there's 1,000 pictures in each book, but they're printed at a pretty small scale for the most part. And then each issue is different based on the randomization of the sequence there. Human error number 5 was called the Icicle Times. And I was teaching a photojournalism course at the time, and I wanted to give an example of my students of how you could come up with an idea and execute it and get it out to the world in less than a month. That was sort of my timeline. And so this was an experiment for using Instagram and social media as a location scouting tool. So this was March, I think, of 2019. There was a great heat wave and then refreeze in Minneapolis, where these poorly insulated homes were creating giant icicles hanging off. And so I just kind of went about almost as like a reporter for this newspaper called the Icicle Times, trying to capture every single insane icicle formation that was forming on the sides of these homes. And I think I got about 500, and then the book was an edit of 50 of the best. And these were blueprint exposed, so diazotypes, so is the process there. That's why you have that kind of color. And then that was also an interesting sort of binding technique where I was using binding clips for that. Latest issue in Human Error, number 6, dice pattern variations. I was experimenting. Dale asks if I'm printing these myself or do I have a printer. For every one of these so far, I've printed, bound, and done everything myself. So this is all me trying to learn the materials. That's a very good question, Dale. I appreciate that. So I wanted to learn how to use a risograph machine. For those of you who aren't familiar with risograph, it's kind of like a copy machine, kind of like a silkscreen machine. You can load different color drums in it and come up with some pretty neat works. Also, there's a really great way of doing overprinting. So running the same print through the printer multiple times, traditionally like in a CMYK format. So I started the issue with different patterns I was making out of dice. And each one of those would be assigned a color. And then they would start to get overlaid on top of one another as you progress through the issue. And as you get more and more into it, the patterns almost start to deconstruct to where the center of the book, where you're seeing the 4 patterns on top of one another, it kind of makes your eyes buzz in a fun way. And then the book does a fade out where we end up back where we began with simple patterns again. And then there's sort of an index at the back. Okay, so as Dale's question said, like all of those were printed, bound, distributed by me. This was part of my studio practice. I was just trying to figure it out. So these are full of errors, full of headaches. Sometimes you want someone else to print the book. And so enter in the world of print on demand. So I also use print on demand. In a previous talk, I shared a lot of my print on demand as sort of like my maquette making process. I want to show you just a book that I did. Where is it? Let me grab that real quick. So this one is quite thick. This was a blurb printed book, and we wrote blurb and said like, what's the maximum number of pages you can fit in a book? We just wanted to figure that out. This was a collaboration with a former student, Bada Turgut, and we explored 6 different libraries and archives over a summer. And we called the book Old Smelly Dead Things because that's what we encountered a lot. The book is sequenced in a collaborative way. It's meant to showcase our varied interests in what we were finding. And I hope it still carries that sense of humor that we had. So we were looking at some massive archives that were in underground, sort of cold storage, as well as insect museums, a natural history museum. The book was kind of meant to be a version of that excess. And I never would feel comfortable binding a book of that kind of thickness. So the self-publishing worked really well. This is one of my favorite spreads from the book. That's on the left is a kind kind of a ramshackle diorama of the last 2 passenger pigeons that were ever captured in the wild and now extinct. And on the right was the piece of paper that was left in contact with that glass plate negative. And for some reason, I'm not sure how it got exposed or faded to that, but you can kind of see a ghost of the image on there. This book is a hot mess in the best way. It's all over the place, but it was a really fun experiment. We made 2 copies, one for her, one for me. And that was all that needed to be issued for that. But the print on demand really solved a lot of problems for us in terms of eliminating technical hurdles. So that's what I call, excuse me, low stakes publishing, meaning I'm not having to front a bunch of money, nor necessarily a ton of time to make these books. Medium stakes self-publishing is where you start getting into, at least in my experience, a significant amount of time and money is starting to be invested. On a previous talk, I talked about my book, Blue Line of Woods. I want to share this piece here called Standard Stars with you. Again, continuing my fascination with astronomical imagery. This was a clamshell book / portfolio I made 10 copies of, like Blue Line of Woods, priced and pitched towards public institutional collections. So this isn't something that I could afford, nor many of my friends. It's meant to go into libraries and museum collections. The cover is a silk screened silver cloth. I did the silk screening of the book cloth, but the construction of the clamshell case, the binding in that case, was done by a professional binder. Blue Line of Woods, I worked with a binder out in Emeryville, and this was a binder based in Minneapolis. These are images from the Astronomical Photographic Data Archive, which is a archive on an old NASA base in North Carolina, about an hour from Asheville, where I'm at. And they're trying to collect all of the glass plate negatives that were produced by astronomical labs. They have over 500,000 in their collection. Harvard has donated their collection to them, I believe, or perhaps it's Yale. I always get those 2 mixed up, but they've got a lot. The US Navy has theirs. But when I started going and revisiting this archive, the thing that I was immediately attracted to was the decay of the imagery, the mistakes. These are the things that I, as a human being, can relate to. So there are these exceptionally fragile and ephemeral images, and I wanted to put them in the most long-lasting kind of concrete mode. So these are produced as polymer photogravures, which is kind of like an intaglio print for those of you who are familiar with printmaking. I printed all the images myself, but it took an entire summer to do an edition of 10 with 12 images in there. And the gravure process also gave the images like a real rich black. So this is like a circular plate. And then what you're seeing, these are all images of the sky, but what you're seeing is the decay of the actual plate itself. In the previous one, someone had spilled oil on the plate. So that was a human error. Whereas this one, probably also human error. It looks like it was dropped and cracked. They put tape on the sides. But then also there's just kind of natural decay happening where the flaking of the emulsions just sort of flaking off and falling apart. And they continue to get more and more Baroque and abstract. So all those little white dots that you're seeing there, those are stars or galaxies. Those are representational. But what I really liked is that the imagery was starting to come back on itself. Nature taking back itself, I think, is a common theme. And that was a significant amount of money and time, but I've been able to place a couple in institutional collections. And so I broke even on that one. Yes, they are unbound sheets in clamshell case, and they have vellum in there. And the name of the archive is the Astronomical Photographic Data Archive, or APDA. APDA. I continue to go there at least once a year and find new things. It's a really amazing collection. And then Susan asked the difficult question, what makes it a book instead of a portfolio in a box? Potato, potato is what I say. This is where Artist Book, I found, because I would pitch a lot of these to librarians, I use that language to avoid that question exactly, Susan. So this is, where your choice of words can really help or hurt you, because I do feel like if I pitch this as a portfolio, libraries would be a little more hesitant to acquire it into their collection. But I very much see this as being like an archival library project. And so Artist Book / portfolio. I have no problem if you call it either one. They are in sequence though. So I would say maybe that helps. And then Beata asked, how did I copy the images in the archive? Yeah, so I've applied for and was able to get a few grants where I was able to spend about a week in the archive over several years. And would bring my scanner and do very high resolution scans. They're glass plates. Smallest ones are about medium format size. They go up to 16 by 20. The selling price point, Kristen, I do recall I sell these for $2,000. The same price that I would ask for my Blue Line of Woods. So I made 10 of them. That's how I was able to do that. And then I would do institutional discounts. So 2000 was kind of my retail price. And then in order to try and encourage museums, libraries that I felt it was a good match for, I would do discounts from that. Okay. High stakes publishing, a real book, or I should say self-publishing. So this is my most recent book, A Light Year of Lead, and I've talked about it. I'm not going to spend too much time on it, but this was the first time where I didn't touch any part of the book until 200 copies showed up at my studio, which is an absolutely frightening thing every bookmaker deals with, because you want to be seeing proofs as much as you can, but every time you do proofs and maquettes, the cost keeps going up. So you're always trying to balance that. So my goals in making this book was I wanted to have a large number of copies, but not too many, where I didn't want to be sitting on boxes. So 200 seemed to be a good goal for me. And then I wanted to be at a price point where my friends and family would be able to afford it, because I had been doing Blue Line of Woods and Standard Stars, big projects for me, but at $2,000 a pop, I was not selling them to my friends and family. So this is trying to find that audience that you want to connect with. This was the first time I worked with a designer, which was amazing. I worked with Sarah Fowler in Minneapolis, who had done work for the Minneapolis Institute of Arts, as well as the Walker. She had done some amazing work. She understood the vision of working on sort of a larger project as well. And, most importantly, she knew her grid systems and her typefaces, and it was amazing to not have to think about that. The book was, we played with a velo binding, which is a kind of fun, maybe more of like an office type binding, but it was a really cool way to work on it. It had several fold out spreads. We got to play with different textures, different paper types for different sections. I collaborated with a poet who was able to provide these sort of chapter markers throughout the book as well. And it was a joy. The book was published during the pandemic. It was so frustrating to have spent 5 years on this work. I did an exhibition that was going to coincide with the publication of the book. I even had written a series of songs and had a whole performance. I was literally going to take the book on the road and tour it as part of this musical. I don't know. It wasn't an artist talk, but I think it was more entertaining than that. It was something kind of weird though. But the pandemic really just killed all the momentum for that. So I was a little crestfallen with that, but you adapt, you try and showcase the book on digital mediums like we're doing now and try and get the word out there. So that was the sort of arc of that project. So I haven't looked at the chat in a while. Yeah, how to approach institutions is, I mean, everyone has a different way of doing it. I'm much more comfortable playing the long game, meaning my relationships have to develop with people naturally. People will know me for more than a year before they even know that I'm an artist. And that's something that I'm actually quite comfortable with. It doesn't result in quick sales, but it does result in more of a natural relationship forming. And then if they find out I'm an artist, or I finally reveal that to them and they want to support the work, that it doesn't feel uncomfortable to me. So I think everyone just sort of has to develop their own sense of comfort for that. But there are definitely things that I've learned through that process that I would love to share at another talk. All right, so the hidden costs of self-publishing. So these are just things I learned along the way. And these are in chronological order. So when you are doing the printing yourself, there's a lot of paper jams, material research, and proofing that you need to take care of. If you're going to produce 5 books that you want to distribute in the world, make 15. You're going to have to probably make 20, honestly. And then you choose those 5 that are the most successful ones to send out through there. That is something that I've learned the hard way there. So just in terms of buying materials and understanding the process is going to be slower, more laborious and expensive than you initially set out for, almost always. Documentation. Show your process starting from the beginning. Even if you don't think that you're going to put the work out into the world or need to share it, it's still good to have for your own records. Once the book is produced, take it to glamour shots and get that really sexy image that you know is going to work well on your social media, your web store, however you want to do that. Do a flip through video. So much of our interaction with books or initial exposure to books these days is through the screen, especially over the last 3 years. It's really important to be thinking about how you would show that. Really, no, glamour shots is sarcastic. Yeah, don't take your book to glamour shots. They'll try and put a silly wig on it. What I mean is spend time making a good photograph of your book. In the same way that if you do exhibitions, a lot of people who do exhibitions don't really think of installation shots as that important, but they really are so important because it is that capsule and that record of how a lot of people are actually going to ever experience that show. Okay. Promotion is, I would say, if you can, is schedule it out 3 to 6 months with as much detail as you can. And that might, if you're on social media, that might come down to like planning out your social media posts. If you have partners that you want to engage with in terms of, you just think that this writer would be a good person to review the book, or maybe they're an influencer. A little bit of vomits coming up on the back of my throat when I say that kind of stuff, but these are how people get their work out into the world these days. So that is something to be very, very conscious of. Once the book is finished, that's actually the start of the job of getting the book out to the world, if this is part of your plan. Again, if you're just making books for your own studio practice, you could ignore a lot of this stuff. But publicity, I would say, is the same schedule as above for reviews, tastemakers. There is a whole industry of people who pitch books to media, whether that be NPR interview, Entertainment Weekly review, who knows, right? If you're having a hard time getting eyeballs on your project, it's not a bad idea to engage with a publicist. If you're doing distribution yourself, packaging and shipping supplies, you got to get your books into the hands of the people who want it, and you want to be able to do that as safely as possible. There's nothing more sad than spending all this time making a great book and then having it show up damaged. And then also just know that your mailers, your inserts, your sleeves are all going to have to be purchased from different organizations, because I haven't found one good place that just sells it all. So just take into consideration supply chain issues. So order this stuff ahead so you're not delaying the launch of your book. And then lastly, distribution, getting your book onto the shelves of other bookstores that you feel like would support it. Printed Matter is one of my favorites in New York, but there's other ones out there. The reason why people would choose to have someone else publish their book is because they don't want to deal with a lot of these things. And I would say especially the promotion, publicity, and distribution are huge headaches for self-publishing. They're really difficult. There are certain, if you self-publish, you're not going to be able to get your book into Barnes & Noble, for instance. It's just not going to happen. And so working with traditional publishers are ways of getting your books into those traditional brick and mortar stores. Dale asked, I find I have more flexibility in paper choice if you print yourself? I don't know if it's flexibility that I'd say, Dale. I just say control. I feel like when I worked with a printer, they had a certain selection of paper stocks that I could go, ones that I'd never seen before. So there was definitely that. But I'm also, I love printing. And so I like having that control. I like pushing the boundaries of what things can be printed on. And in my experience, working with a Lightyear lead, for instance, I had to go through, I think, 4 rounds of proofing with the printer until I got the kind of black that I wanted on a specific paper. And they ended up having to basically run it through twice in order to build up the ink on it, in my understanding. And that was more of a frustrating, took longer, it delayed the book a little bit, but you just kind of have to stand up for yourself when you're working with that kind of work. Okay, so this is the real goal for me for this evening, is to stop talking and start writing down a resource list for self-publishing. And I think right now, the way I'd like to start is just thinking of categories. So what here, and feel free just to start throwing stuff in the chat. What kind of categories would be useful? This is something that I'd like to host on 6 Feet or a future platform where people can go to it and get advice or just start poking around. So equipment, whether you're doing like LaserJet or inkjet printers, what have you worked with in the past that works well? And then consumable recommendations. That might be different paper stocks. If you're doing your own binding supplies, staplers, mailers, that kind of stuff, I think is really useful to have a list of. Susan asked what printers I've used for my books. I've used everything from a Brother LaserJet printer for the black and white zines. I've used Kinko's, Blurb for the print on demand stuff. But I use like an Epson 9900 48-inch printer that I've used for some of the big poster books, especially the ones that I printed on newsprint. And then otherwise, just like a 17-inch tabletop pigment inkjet printer I found works really well, like an Epson 5000 or something like that. Those have been good for me. Software and process recommendations for DIY printing, that's a good one, or I like that. I'd like to have a category of collaborators, like designers, editors, publicity folks, things, that you just people who have worked with photographers before on photo book projects and you had a good experience and could recommend them, I think would be awesome. On-demand printers, we are probably all familiar with like big ones like Blurb, but I think there's a lot out there. So there's some online places that do great cheap stuff. I've used Linko in Long Island City for doing newsprint projects as well. There's also boutique printers out there. Conveyor Books, Edition One come to mind. I think they're great. Cool. Oh, Jerry, definitely put you on the list. That's exactly it. There's no shameless self-promotion here. We are a community and we're trying to help each other out. So if this is something you do, you're a designer, you're a broker, you're a producer that helps sort of connect photographers with printing places and making sure that they get the kind of books they want, that please put your contact information in there. Yeah, software, Morgan writes, InDesign is great. I've used InDesign for laying out all of my books in the past. I think it would be awesome if we had a place or a resource list of bookstores, physical or online spaces that sell self-published books. I think that would be fantastic. Lightroom, Paul asked if Lightroom works for laying out books. I have used Lightroom for laying out books, and I think it can be a nice interface, especially I think there's a plugin that just links it right to Blurb. But like any sort of, there are templates that you have to work within. I'll say that, Paula. And so you may find yourself kind of in a design wise being a little stuck, or maybe feeling like you can't be as free as you want. But if you feel overwhelmed by InDesign and you're just trying to get a physical maquette that you can share with other people so you can then connect with a designer, it's worked great. And a lot of my students have used that in the past. Leslie asks where this is being going to be rewatched. That's a good question. Susan might know that. I will share the link. I'll put it on Vimeo and I'll share it to our Pictures Plus group too, Leslie, so no worries. What else? Examples of artists who have done this kind of work really well. So what books have you seen out there that are just impressive? And I would say maybe have handled the promotion and gaining recognition of their book in a nice way. I'm always inspired when I see a new kind of flip through video or different approach to sort of announcing a project. I think those can be exciting to see. And then what else? We're talking about some book binding resources. That is a whole, I mean, that's its own art form, right? Making your own book, that is its own thing. And I have certainly found my own limitations with, basically I can do a Japanese stab stitch and that's about it. That's what I'm comfortable doing. I've done some, I like making folios and exploring it, but it's one of those things where if I was going to distribute it to the general public, I would definitely hire that kind of stuff out. But it's exceptionally fun to do. Okay, I think that's all I have for slides. So I'm going to do the promotion bit here now. So don't forget to donate if you can to 6 Feet every week. We're trying to keep it going and make it work. And Susan has done an amazing job. I really appreciate all the work she's doing to make this happen. If you want to find out more on my work, buy a couple of my books. I do have them for sale on my website, and my IG handle is Eric William Carroll. And then lastly, I also have a Patreon. Some of you are my fan club members, and I truly love your support. It helps me continue to be an artist, because I left academia after being there for 10 years and am now pursuing my life as a freelance artist. And it's scary and exciting and really, really, really fun. So I want to just open up the floor to other questions, other comments. People have thoughts they want to share. Let's do it.
One thought that I had is we do have quite a few folks on this Zoom tonight who have gone through the process of finding a designer and a publisher. I know June is here. Are you still here, June? Are you still here? Let me check the list. She may not be. So anyway, would love y'all's. You can put it in the chat as Eric said, and we can just start. You can start sharing your goods and bads experiences. So I can share a bad experience.
Yeah, let's hear it.
So for the Pieces of Light exhibition, the catalog that we did, I called the printer. We had the thing. It was all set up. We got the price. We wrote a grant. We got funding. Everything was there. And we got just enough funding to cover the 500 books we printed. And I didn't know that these off the press, like not inkjet, but laser prints, that landscape versus the wide, the landscape versus the portrait, right? That a lot of presses can't do the long. So it turned out that we had raised all this money. We were on this tight deadline. We drop off the like ready to print files. And they were like, your cover's not coming through this press. Like that's not going to happen. And so just those little things that you don't know, like you have to just kind of keep doing it. But I wondered if that might be something to add to the list, like, I don't know, things, the kinds of things not, I don't know, you know what I'm saying? Like,
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would say if you don't know the difference between RGB black and CMYK black, and you're going to go to an offset printer, that's going to be a huge headache for you. And this is where having a designer or a print broker or someone being able to figure that out for you is really important. Yeah, rich black. If you don't know what that phrase is, chances are you're going to want an intermediary between you and your printer. So, and just understanding the different kinds of printing that's out there. There's HP Indigo, there's true offset, there's web press, there's lots of different ways of making books out there. And so understanding different print technologies. I think there's a show coming up at ICP, if I'm not mistaken, of Richard Benson. Y'all familiar with the photographer and printer Richard Benson? He did a lot of books with like Lee Friedlander and stuff like that back in the day. I actually studied with Rich because he had basically made his own version of an Epson printer that allowed for multi-pass printing, where he was able to send it through multiple times. And I was really interested in that kind of work. And so he was a big inspiration, not only to me, but to a lot of photographers out in the world. And I think they're doing a series on his work. It's either ICP or MoMA, one of those two institutions in New York. Dale asked if I have a recommendation for inkjet printer compatible vellum. I've found, let's see, no, I don't. Every time I've done vellum, I've done laser. And the kind of vellum that I've bought it's always been in a pad at an art supply store that's usually in the architecture section. Sometimes it has grid lines on it. Sometimes it has, it's blank. I've had great success printing on that through LaserJet. Pigment inkjet I have not had success with, but I'm sure there's someone who makes that out there. And again, if anyone else has experience, please share this, because this is, otherwise there's so much Googling that needs to be done. Other questions, thoughts, comments?
Jerry, I would love to hear, what did you say you were? A book broker? No, what was the call?
Well, I'm a publisher. I've been publishing since 2000. Just, I'm a little different. My first book, I was a photographer. I'm still a photographer, but most of my work was nature for 20 plus years. My first book was a 9x9 soft cover, printed 5,000 copies. And I sold them all in 11 months. It's not normal. I would never tell anyone to ever do that. But you know, I basically specialize in offset. I'm not a fan of digital printing. The problem with offset is you have to print more copies. So I guess the thing that I ran into in my move back into brokering for photographers exclusively, right now I have 11 book projects being printed. I print in Korea. I don't print in China. I've printed with the same printer for 22 years. But, you know, I watch artists pay these huge numbers to have books printed. And those numbers, they're real. I mean, it costs that to print them. The thing that I'm running into is the photographer actually doesn't own the books. They may get 200 or 300 to supply the Kickstarter, but all the rest of them belong to the publisher. And I don't get it. And I've asked photographers that are doing this, and they say it's the cost of advancing their career. Well, what I'm doing, I asked these photographers, are you the one actually promoting these? When you get these books in, are you out pushing these books? Are you the one sending these books out to, getting a publicist and those things? And they are, and it's really confusing to me. So I really got back into doing brokering and guiding photographers to do photo books on offset, and basically helping them get this thing going, delivering it to their house, and let them, they get the books. If you're paying for 1,000 books, but you only get 300, I'm just confused with that. And I know it's a different animal in this genre of bookmaking versus nature, which is, this book here. I mean, this photographer here, never done a book before, during the pandemic, printed 750. I think this book was 30 bucks to print. Cloth, cotton, tip-on image, beautifully printed, offset, spot gloss, matte. I mean, it's just an incredible book. Sold them all in a year. It's just a kind of a thing that I'm trying to learn, this other genre, working with photographers that do more like cultural landscape, those type of things. It's a different animal, but I would love to be able to help photographers like you guys to be able to put together a book. This photographer here never, he designed this whole entire book. It's not great. But it's a really nice book. Never touched InDesign before. So, I tell most photographers, don't be scared of InDesign. Don't be scared of offset press, other than, you have to print more copies. But something I've found is you can generally print 350 to 500 copies offset, and it costs about the same for 200 copies on a digital press.
Yeah, that's great, Jerry. Your experience is what people pay you for there. That relationship that you have with the printer in Korea, all that stuff is so important, because that can, if you've never printed a book before, it can feel exceptionally overwhelming after that first conversation with a printer. And so, it's awesome to have people like you in the world that can serve as the producer, the negotiator, the broker between you and the printer. Awesome.
So I wish that I'd made it to all these talks about bookmaking, but things have been kind of crazy on my end, so I finally got to this one.
Yeah, no worries.
Yeah.
Well, this is where we're trying to collect all those resources, so we have that available to everyone in the 6 Feet community, because we're all coming at it with different levels. Some people are just looking for different printer papers that they can run at home, and then how to do the binding, and other people have an idea or a book ready to go, and they're like, I want 1,000 offset copies made because I know I can push these. So
call me. I'm just across the mountain.
Cool.
I'm just in Johnson City, straight up I-26.
That's awesome.
I know you guys are in Asheville. A lot of them.
Cool.
But I'm doing a book in Scotland right now for a Scotland photographer. So I work all over the world.
Nice. That's great. Are there any other comments? Yeah, Jerry, if you could do you have like a website or whatever you could put in the chat?
Yes.
That'd be cool. That would be great. Thank you. Other little tidbits, questions people want to share, please.
I just want to say, Eric, thank you, because I never had any idea of what you did when I first met you. I just did not. And I'm blown away because you're a true artist in your own right. You are. It's
Oh,
amazing.
that means a lot,
I've been,
Leslie. Thank you.
but it's the truth. I've been making books, but they're all handmade books. And you saw what I've been doing, but with no, I just love bookbinding, and that's how I got started. But you're amazing.
Oh, you're too sweet, Leslie. Thank you. I really appreciate that.
Oh, it's the truth.
Hey, Mary, Swanee, I saw you had your hand up. Did you have something?
Well, I just wanted to agree. It's just been amazing to see all of the breadth of your interest in bringing your work to print. That's what I love the most. All the different forms, all the different materials, all the different audiences, all the different price points, none of which is intentional for a specific move in your career.
Right.
The great thing about what you're doing is you're following your artistic drive and your interest in the materiality of it and finding your way to all these different places, which is fantastic. And I couldn't agree more about the wonderful audience of the institutional collectors. Artist books that we think of as kind of the classic handmade, hand applied materials. But from my perspective, since photography became more easy to run through printers, easy to do hand applied and putting your needle through and stitching and all of those things, we really have a kind of a revolution of photographic artist books. And I think some of the best of the long special collections, not just at institutions, but a lot of cities, public libraries, San Francisco, even Phoenix, north of where I am, they've long collected artist books and really welcomed the kind of new to them, the photographic artist books. So I've really benefited from learning from friends that have been doing what we think of as the photographic artist book for a long time. And that's been an area of research for me of late. In the Griffin show, or the Griffin Zoom month of June is going to be all on photo books. And they asked me if I wanted to do something in the Institute, and all of that. So I'm going to do time to do the most research, and I'm going to do a panel with someone that's at a university special collection, someone that's at a private collection, hopefully when those books come to your garage, it's like, what do you do with them? So that's what's exciting for me. And then if I can just say one more thing, my co-author Darius Himes and I are deep in updating for our 3rd edition of Publisher Photography book, which is going to, when you think about, it's only been 9 years since our last edition, but oh my gosh, what has in publishing and self-publishing and institutional collecting and everything about photo books seems to have changed. I don't know if you all saw the Aperture photo book review that came out at the time of the Perry Photo announcements and all. There's a 20-year timeline in that Darius was putting together, and that's kind of, we're going to sort of look at all of that in the next edition. So it'll take about a year probably to have that all get done, but we're deep in research and it's really exciting. So thanks for the chance to talk all about that.
That sounds amazing. Very excited for the new edition. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments that folks have? Susan, where will this video be found for people who might want to share it or reshare it?
So we will post it on the 6 Feet website under content. So there's a section there that'll have the recorded. And then we'll be announcing this in a bigger way as we launch the new kinship project. But we are in the process right now of doing a community-based social network, which will look like a combination between Facebook and Slack. It'll be branded to our community. So you would go there and there will be, resources waiting for you and ways to engage and comment on the resources that you encounter there. And so we're looking forward to that. That'll make viewing our recordings so much easier. So
Yeah, and a nice offline way of integrating or accessing the content that comes up during these synchronous meetings.
Yeah, thank you. That's a perfect way to say it. Swanee, you okay with a couple of questions? I think you froze for a second. There you are. So
Why, but
yeah, so when I'm writing grants, right? So I'm a grant writer by day, and there's amazing databases, right, that I go to and search by funding categories and all that kind of stuff. For institutions, is there something similar that you get this, are there databases where be like, oh, here's the libraries, they need to be of a certain size or whatever that we can use for research?
well, I can share with you. And again, I'm sorry, I don't know why I'm cutting out. I hope that this will come through. But
Yeah.
One of the things that really helps in researching institutions is if they have developed a collection strategy. Collection, it'll be super clear the areas of collecting, what the objects need to be, all of the details. And one of the things that I've come to learn, and Eric, I'm sure you know this as well, today's, let's say the viewing rooms or the study rooms in a library have print rails. So not just the book cradle to look at the one-of-a-kind object or spread out the accordion, they have print rails. So when the curators of special collections I've talked to are really interested in the single subject or single artist object that is archivally produced, of course, in an archive. The spine side. And then I think my greatest advice to all of you with special collections is think subject. Because if that institution, if your work is about climate change, for example, and that institution is a major university that is dedicating departments and even might have a center of that subject, they're going to be interested in bringing a different vision of that topic to their constituents. And that will tell me that some of the departments will actually help to fund some of the acquisitions. If the librarian spots something that's, something like yours, Eric, a deeper body of work, they'll help to fund it because they really want their students the right ones. And then you can do all of that research through the academic programs and all. I mean, librarians almost always have their email and their phone number right on their page on the websites. And they, Susan K. Grant and I did about disseminating your artist book information. And we found that of the special collections librarians we interviewed, 80% of them welcomed in-person visits. Like they bought the majority of what they were acquiring from you in person. And so I think things and people are beginning to get back, but the librarians are doing all this on Zoom. They're not closed, they're active, and really an amazing group of people. Really, so I hope that's helpful.
That's so helpful. Thank you.
Any other questions, comments? I think there was a question about why people print from printers out of the USA. And my understanding is it's always been a cost. There are a couple cases where I've known books to be printed in Italy just because of there's a certain quality. There might be a specific printer that does one thing very well, and so you'll go to that. But my understanding is like why most people choose offset printing overseas is due to just the high cost that it happens in the States. So.
My last question, Eric, is what would be most helpful to you if we want to put together a resource? Should we could put together a Google form, or I think there's probably a lot of wisdom in the group. I just what would be most helpful?
Well, I think I'm going to download the chat. There's a lot of great material in here already, so I'm just going to parse through that.
Mm-hmm.
And then I think creating the categories and finding out where we might be short, and then putting out specific calls to address those categories, like more specific asks. And maybe this, depending on how I'm able to, my workload this week, we might be able to have that ready for Eric Mace's talk next week.
Nice.
And then we'd just be able to point people to that. So yeah, does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Cool. Leslie, how do you actually get librarians at universities? Well, my experience, Leslie, is librarians have always been a little more welcoming to me than curators. I hope there's not too many curators that I offended in the audience. Curators are overwhelmed with people pitching work at them. Librarians, I found, actually want to engage with the general public and be able to help you figure out a way to place your book. So I mean, start at home where it's comfortable for you. So Leslie, you're in Atlanta. I would go to the High Museum, has an institutional a library as part of theirs. There's a librarian that's going to head that. That would just start as a user too. They're going to have amazing books that you can just go there and access and spend time with on your own. So I've always done just start with from the user standpoint. So for instance, at the Walker Art Center, where I used to be in Minneapolis, I went there because I was really interested in the kind of work that John Sarkowski was doing when he worked in the design department there. I wanted to see what kind of mundane photographs he was taking and how he was celebrating the Gopher Camera Club, which was the camera club in Minneapolis back then. And through that, I developed a relationship with the librarian. After my third visit, I said, I make books too. I made a press release, one sheet that had the information on there. If she was interested, I could send her a PDF of the book or a flip through video if she wanted more information. I could even drop off copies for her because it was locally. And that worked. That was how I did it, right? So I've just found that librarians to be totally echo Mary's comments, where they're so friendly and warm, and my experience of working with them has always been fantastic. So that's where I would start, is just start with your local libraries, and then they're part of networks that will cross state and continental boundaries. So you'll be able to they'll be able to help you out, at least I would hope. Other questions? Award categories, that would be great. There are a lot of those right now. Yes. Cool. We all have been fantastic. I always get nervous when I'm sharing my work, but you guys make me feel relaxed and very supportive. And I'm really excited to work on making this information easily accessible, something that would be, like I said, useful to a first-time bookmaker as well as a seasoned publisher. So I'm excited to start working on this. And again, if you all come up with other questions or ideas, please come back, see Eric Mace's talk next week, Wednesday, same time, same place, and we'll continue this conversation. So. Ooh, photo book podcast. Absolutely. Yes. Cool. All right. Well, thanks, everyone. Be
Thank
well.
you.
Have a good evening. Take care of yourself and your loved ones, and we'll see you next week. All right.
Thank you,
Yeah.
Eric.